Dave, this, while not the most financially successful WrestleMania, is one of the most fascinating to me because,
Absolutely.
oh yeah, and you lived it, and
I lived it. So yeah, and in that sense, from for me, it was maybe maybe the most memorable of them all
let,
in some ways.
let's
Yeah.
back into the discussion by first asking you the idea that bomb threats against Sergeant Slaughter's life changed the venue from the massive LA Coliseum to the LA Sports Arena. How real were those bomb threats, and how real of a factor was it in moving the show?
I can't tell you about if there were ever threats. There may have been, but that had nothing to do with moving the show. I mean, look, when you have got 14,000 tickets sold and you're, whatever it was, 6, 7 weeks out in a 100,000 seat building, you know what I mean? I mean, you got to figure something out at this point. And that's what they, there was only one answer at that point. I didn't realize the advance because they were making up advances. So that's how bad things were.
Wow.
When it came to ticket sales, is they were making up advances publicly because it was like they didn't even sell out the sports arena. I was in Los Angeles the week of that show because I was coming back from Japan, and there was Cauliflower Alley was actually, I believe, the Saturday night before WrestleMania was the Cauliflower Alley, which was a very interesting thing because it's like there's all these people who wanted to go to Cauliflower Alley, and Vince banned everyone from going. And I don't know the dynamics of this, but it's a really sad story because I had seen Stu Hart and Helen Hart that weekend. They were in town for WrestleMania and Cauliflower Alley. And Stu had never, I believe Stu had never been to Cauliflower Alley before. And was talking to him, and he was so excited about seeing Luthez and Buddy Rogers and these type of people. And then, so I'm at Cauliflower Alley, and Stu's not there. And nobody from WWE was there. I mean, nobody. And they're all and everyone's in town. And I knew that they were banned, but, I mean, I didn't think that had anything to do with Stu. I mean, Stu, banned Stu Hart from going to Cauliflower Alley. And whatever it was, I think it would have been, this is 91. So I went to SummerSlam. It was in the Garden at 91 with Bret Hart and Kurt Hennig, right?
Yep.
So I see Stu and Helen. I'm walking around. I see Stu and Helen. And I go, Stu, what happened? You didn't go to Cauliflower Alley. And he just looks all sad. And it's just like, they, and I don't want to say who because I don't know who. He never told me. They gave him bogus directions. I was so mad. And then Buddy Rogers died, so he never saw Buddy Rogers again.
So it wasn't that they told him explicitly not to go; it's that they told him, "Yeah, you can go," but gave him.
Oh, I don't know. I don't think that they told him he couldn't go, and I don't know if it was. I don't know who gave him the bogus directions, but somebody gave him bogus directions.
Wow.
Yeah, and I thought that was like, come on.
Absolutely. So the dynamic of Slaughter Hogan playing off the tensions in the Persian Gulf. You were at the National, the sports newspaper founded by the legendary sports writer Frank DeFord, and you were covering pro wrestling in a way that few were and even less were comfortable with in terms of inside the business, and you were critical of the ways in which the WWF leveraged, to use a kind term, these real tensions and what would become a full-scale war where American lives were lost to put heat on a wrestling program. And I know it's a massive, sprawling tale, Dave, with all kinds of twists and turns for you, but as best you can for our listeners, talk about how sensitive, I guess, the WWF was to critique of using this very real situation, this international strife, to put heat on Hogan and Slaughter.
Yeah. I mean, I guess there was always a chance there was going to be a war when they started this feud. I just remember it was a couple of days, and we knew that there's either going to be a war, or there's not, and they were already, they already got their direction. You know what I mean? It wasn't like we went to war and they go, let's exploit this war. It wasn't like that.
Right.
But it was, but once there was a war, it's not like they backed off either. In fact, they went in the other direction, and it became a real interesting thing because it's like people will go, well, God, they did the Nazis and they did the Germans, but you know what? They never did it during the war itself. That was, when we had the Nazis like Hans Schmidt, that's 51. The war's over in 45. It's 6 years later with whoever the first Japanese heels were, whether it was Duke Kiyomuka or whatever. Then we're talking well into the 50s.
Right.
It wasn't like during these wars we did this. During the Vietnam War, I never saw a Vietnamese heel. When the hostage crisis, people think, oh, wrestling Iron Sheik, blah blah blah. Iron Sheik worked the Carolinas during the hostage crisis, and Jim Crockett Promotions. I mean, the rule was number one, he wasn't waving that flag, okay, and there was no mention of that thing. He was getting enough heat as it was. I mean, it was considered the worst taste possible, and that was not even necessarily a war, but it was like a war. But I mean, there was no exploitation of that whatsoever. I mean, he was in the territory. He'd been in the territory before. He was not made lead heel, even though he probably had more heat than anyone else. But he was a strong heel. But he was, in those days, he was a good wrestler, and he was a strong heel. Strong heel before any of that happened. Well, anyway, so this one, they went in there, and they were going to exploit that war. And I said, like, God, exploiting the war, that's... And when I wrote a story, and I talked to, it was a couple of people, but the key ones were Jesse Ventura, which is funny only because I think Jesse actually switched his viewpoint down the line, thinking, well, it's only wrestling. But at first, when I asked Jesse, I go, Jesse, what do you think? And he just goes, I think this is just disgusting. I was in the military. He went on a big rant. I mean, and they were pissed at that. And the other one was Bob Costas, who I knew from other people. And Bob Costas was one of their big celebrities. And this is where it really got bad was, I called Bob, Bob, what do you think? And Bob was just like, I'm dropping out. I'm not doing this. This is in bad taste. So they lost one of their key celebrities. So now it's a story because Bob Costas not only is dropping out, but he's not dropping out because I have a schedule conflict or I'm dropping out because, you know what I mean? Or, some nice way of dropping out. He didn't feel like good of doing it. It's like, I'm dropping out because you're explaining the war. Now it's a big story. So, yeah, their response was to try to get me fired from my job. Which, I mean, it was, that's what it was. Linda McMahon, writing letters. Frank, we told you he was going to do this. And, DeFord was completely behind me, so it didn't happen. But, it led to a lot of things. And, ever since then, I mean, they've had their issues with DeFord. I mean, right down to when Vince was in front of Congress and, blamed DeFord. DeFord, wrote a story about Chris Benoit. And so he's had it in for us, and it's, like, okay, yeah, okay. The Chris Benoit murder situation is not a story. It's because Frank DeFord's had some grudge against you or something silly like that.
Does he know what he looks like, Dave, or did he think Armand Kettian was actually Frank DeFord when he swiped at the notes?
Well, that was another one. Yeah. That had no...
It's also real sports, so...
Yeah. And Bob Costas years later, too.
Yep.
Yeah, Vince, during the XFL thing, where Vince just... and I guess Vince, Vince had a memory, I guess, right? That was many... This is, the XFL's 2001, and this is 1991, so it's 10 years later.
Now, this said, Hogan and Slaughter goes down, the story plays out as it does, but when they don't see tickets moving, Dave, such that they can come close to filling the LA Coliseum, where did they get the idea that this would be so great? I feel like they didn't even have business reasons to double down. You know what I mean? There was no indication that this was catching on such that it's worth staying the course even as this becomes a real full-scale war because look at the business we're doing. It wasn't even really lighting anything on fire.
No. In fact, I think that there was a backlash because as I recall, and I don't even recall this because I just remember writing about it recently and looking all this stuff up. During this period, it's like, and this is the one, how people go, controversy creates cash.
Right.
You've heard that a million times. Okay. And sometimes it does. But, this, whether it's whatever sport it is, the right kind of controversy, Tanya Harding, Nancy Kerrigan, right? I'm just throwing that out.
Tyson Holyfield.
Tyson Holyfield, John Jones, Daniel Cormier, Brock Lesnar, Frank Mir, okay? Lennox Lewis, what it was Lennox Lewis and Tyson or whatever. But I mean, the right kind of controversy in a one-on-one situation creates cash, okay? But this was not, Hogan and Slaughter have a personal issue. This was a contrived fake war thing. Everybody deep down knew that Sergeant Slaughter wasn't, part of, you know what I mean?
Yep.
Wasn't part of, the whatever, the, Iraqi government or anything. He wasn't really friends with Saddam Hussein. It was like a tasteless storyline in a lot of people's eyes. And they did an NBC special while this is going on. And it was, the rating was so low that in fact they ended up, not only did they lose the Coliseum because they couldn't sell tickets, but they did an NBC special built around Hulk Hogan going to military bases and, this whole triumphant thing against, in the middle of the war. And it was the lowest rated, not only was it the lowest rated that they ever did, and it was far lower than before, but they got canceled by NBC for bad ratings, which they never had before this one. That was the one they ended up doing, I think, one more, but that was because it was already under contract. That cost them NBC Saturday Night's Main Event, and it cost them, I can't say it cost them 100,000 people because they didn't have the attraction that year for 100,000 people anyway. That's the reality. It just wasn't. WrestleMania in Los Angeles, it was not that big. Los Angeles had Super Bowls. Los Angeles had NBA championship games. WrestleMania wasn't as big as it would later become. And the idea of WrestleMania in Los Angeles did not wow the people in Los Angeles that much. And it's one of the reasons, today it'd be a different story. But then, no. And, they were going to get, they had 14,000 tickets sold. So we're talking 20, right? Maybe 20, maybe 25.
Sure.
But that's pretty embarrassing for them at that stage of the game. So they moved it indoors.
Now, WWE, anyway, of course, has done. Go ahead, Dave.
But I mean, what I said when I was in Los Angeles that week, I was listening to the radio, and they were giving tickets away the days before WrestleMania for the frickin' sports arena that only held 16,000 people. That's how not strong that was in the market, whether it was the angle or whatever the reason was. People, it was one of those things where it was, go away heat. People weren't buying tickets for it. They were, they could do 16,000 for house shows. Not regularly, but they'd done it, and they couldn't sell out for WrestleMania at that point with all that publicity.
Now, since then, WWE's done a lot of pay-per-views in Los Angeles, including another WrestleMania. Why did they never try the Coliseum again?
I think that they got scared from the first one.
Yeah.
Nobody ever did. Nobody ever did the Coliseum. There's a couple of people who could have done the Coliseum at certain times that probably wish they had, but it just never didn't happen. But I mean, they could do it now. I mean, it wouldn't, you know what I mean? Like now they could do it, and they would probably, I don't know that you would get 100,000 people, but they come close on these a lot of the WrestleMania sell out, and the ones that don't come pretty damn close. So I mean, I would think a WrestleMania in Los Angeles would get 80,000 people now. I would think so.
Now, the war was pretty much done or winding down,
It was actually over before WrestleMania.
So why did they keep going with the Hogan-Slaughter feud all the way through the rest of the year, if that was the whole idea of the feud?
It was just what they had. You know what I mean? That was just what they had. I mean, yeah, they had nobody else, and there's not really an answer for it. It's just that was what was booked. And I remember once the war's over, the controversial aspect of it's not there anymore.
Right.
I mean, at that point, everything's fine. It's like the war is over, so it's not like it's an exploitation of the war anymore.
Warrior and Savage in the retirement match. This strikes me as high art, the way this all played out. And I wonder what you thought about it. All my people of my generation see this as one of the most amazing things to ever play out as far as like storytelling, emotion, and just the whole thing is a marvelous thing to take in, even today in retrospect. What do you think about the Hogan, pardon me, I don't know why I keep saying that, the Warrior Savage retirement match, the Elizabeth Sherry scenes afterwards?
I thought it was absolutely tremendous.
Yeah.
Post-match was tremendous. The match was tremendous. I think it was probably Warrior's best match of his career. I would think. I mean, that was one of those nights where you went, goddamn, Randy Savage is phenomenal. That was one of the best performances Randy Savage ever had.
From Steamboat to Hogan at 5 to Warrior.
but
I think Savage is the original WrestleMania Dave, Mr. WrestleMania Dave.
oh, absolutely, before Shawn Michaels. But the thing on that is look, a lot of guys can have a great match with Ricky Steamboat. You know what I mean?
Sure.
And he wasn't the only one. And Ricky Steamboat had better matches than that one, although it was a great match. I don't think anyone had a match like that with Warrior. And again, it was the storytelling of the match. Randy letting him, pin him with his foot on him, I think it was.
Yep.
And then you had the, Randy was, the retirement thing. It was Randy's babyface turn, Elizabeth's return. I mean, it was just, they really had, everything working out there.
What was the idea around retiring Randy Savage? Did he want to go? Did they want him to go?
It was a temporary thing. The idea was that he wanted to get off the juice and he wanted to have a kid, and he didn't want people to see him looking like that, so he was going to take some time off, and then he was going to come back when it was time to come back.
Did he ever have a child?
No. Him and Elizabeth, if you were, I don't, they did the wedding thing that year because that was like the beginning of the wedding, which was also at SummerSlam.
Yep.
And then they split up very shortly after that. So, but they never did have the child, no.